going to be reading from screen. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. You might think, oh goodness me, what a dark and cheerless chapter. Don't worry, we will get to light by the end of the tunnel. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. And I'll just point out that phrase, under the sun. Most of Ecclesiastes talks about life under the sun, which I think is a kind of a code phrase, which is the kind of life you get if you leave God out. So with that as a little bit of background, let's read through the chapter. Again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. Inside of their oppressors there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought, the dead who are already dead, more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been, and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. Then I saw that all toil and all skill in work comes from a man's envy of his neighbour. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. A fool who folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and a striving after wind. Again, I saw vanity under the sun. One person who has no other, either son or brother. Yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and an unhappy business. Like somebody else is striving with wind. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, and has not another to lift him up. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though a man might prevail against one who is alone, 2 will withstand him. A 3-fold cord is not quickly broken. Better was a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king, who no longer knew how to take advice. For he went from prison to the throne, though in his own kingdom he had been born poor. I saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. There was no end to all the people, all of whom he led. Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity, a striving after wind. Let's pray a moment, shall we? Father, that book of Ecclesiastes at times can be pretty difficult to understand, and maybe we've not all immediately grasped everything as we've gone through it on screen. Lord, we pray you will speak to us through that today. Oh, and Lord, help us to see Jesus by the time we're done. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Back in the early days of our married life, when Jenny was teaching at a junior school in Cambridge, we went along to the staff Christmas do. I think it was a Christmas do. One of the staff had a connection with one of the local colleges, and so it was wangled that we could go along to this college's dining hall out of term time for the Christmas do, instead of just, a house. And our neighbours from 2 doors down came along as well, because the wife there was working in school as well. They were a down-to-earth northern couple. They were definitely no fuss. The trouble was that the food was fussy. Think in terms of some of the things you might have seen if you've been watching MasterChef, the new series on television this week. So our neighbour several times asked for none of this fancy sauce stuff on his steak. What he said he wanted was just a piece of steak on a plate. And each time he sent back his fussy food, and they brought him another one, which was still slathered in whatever sauce it was. He got quite frustrated, quite agitated by the end, and just repeated, "All I want is just a piece of steak on a plate." And that phrase has stuck with us for over 30 years. Yes, times do move on, and tastes move on. Whereas, I suppose, maybe 50 years ago, it was meat and two veg. Nowadays, it's much more likely to be pizza, curry, you name it. And there are some people still who prefer a piece of steak on a plate. And for them, this world is perhaps moving too fast. At least in a direction they don't want to go. Perhaps they will sometimes, just like this day's title, say, stop the world, I want to get off. At least I want to enjoy it as it was. It might be food. It might be technology. Some people are still trying ever so hard to get to grips with simple email. Right, one in their inbox is quite enough for a day. They've only just got themselves used to a non-Bakelite version of a phone with a tangly wire. But the world is telling them it's time to upgrade to super-fast broadband and 4G technology, and they still think these are tablets. People like that will probably think, yes, stop the world, stop the world. But it's not just the rush of modern society that might prompt that. We've had some notable anniversaries this year. Earlier on this year we were remembering, by proxy, because I don't think there's an awful lot of eyewitnesses left now, those dreadful battles of the First World War, the Somme, 100 years ago this year. 4.5 months of war at its worst, July the 1st to November the 18th, 1916. Perhaps you can think back to not quite a month ago, the 21st of October. People were remembering that horrific accident in the Welsh village of Aberfan, 50 years earlier. Now, I just about remember that. I remember seeing something of that on the television news. The whole country stopped, horrified, incredulous that 144 people, most of them children, were killed in a colliery spoil heap, as you can see from that picture on the left. Well, it had been raining and raining and raining and converted that heap into a pile of slurry, which then just moved down that hillside, engulfed a local school, a part of the village. Not that I heard anyone actually say the words, stop the world, I want to get off. But maybe that's how some people were feeling. If that is what this world is like, then I'm not sure I really want to be a part of it. And yet, like us Brits waking up on the 24th of June, the Americans waking up this week, there is no option actually to bail out. Actually, in those cases, well, maybe that's not so much to worry about, because there could be another referendum about leaving the European Union. Though we probably have to have a referendum about whether to have a referendum, I guess. And in 8 years' time, all this @NotMyPresident hashtag kind of stuff will have gone, because in 8 years' time, possibly in nearly 4 years' time, Donald Trump will not be president. But we can't stop the world. The world will go on, apparently, regardless of us, unless Jesus returns in these next few years. But actually, there's nothing new in this. That chapter that we read from the Bible book of Ecclesiastes shows that life was very much the same in general terms, best part of 3,000 years ago. Did you notice as we read through, exactly the same kind of gripes we might have nowadays? And some of them very legitimate gripes too. Exploitation was there in that first verse. And there is the abuse of power in the world now as well, of course, just as then. I don't know exactly what you think about the topic of the UK's foreign aid budget. I know what some of you do. Well, I know that I'm frustrated that so much of what this country does give ends up not in the pockets or the lives of the people it's intended to help, but in the pockets of the people who are already exploiting them. There are places where civil war And the ready availability of all kinds of modern weapons means that it's just about practically impossible to help the most needy. There's inertia, there's more or less public vested interests within our own society. That means no matter how sincere and how well-meaning our politicians might be, no one's going to be perfecting British society in the near future. Ecclesiastes got it exactly right. I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun. Behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. That's what the world was like 3,000 years ago, and still is. And the reaction of stop the world, well, that's nearly what they say next, isn't it? Verses 2 and 3. Kohelet, the preacher, I thought the dead who are already dead, more fortunate than the living who are still alive, but better than both is he who has not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. These are so horrific to see. Maybe, he says, it means it's better not to see them at all. But that's not all that is reacted against in this chapter. We probably identify with that first response in some ways. We might feel exactly the same about the rat race. Then I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbour. This also is vanity, the striving after wind. Now, all there is probably an overstatement, deliberately for effect. It's something that we all do all the time. Yeah? But keeping up with the Joneses, and goodness me, have you seen the neighbour's lawn? Is something we're familiar with in any age. On the other hand, if you go to the other extreme and say, I refuse to keep up with the Joneses, I'm just going to drop out and go with peace and love and hippie man, like in the 1960s, well, that's not going to solve things either, because Ecclesiastes gives us the answer to that as well. Okay, if you refuse to work, the fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. You're your own worst enemy if you go to that other extreme. Because that's well before the welfare society. Not working was not an option. Somewhere in the middle, we read there, between these two extremes, there is some kind of sanity. Better is a handful of quietness than two hands full of toil and a striving after wind. Although, I don't know, maybe even that is meant to be a bit ironic, because have you ever tried holding quietness? Nice work if you can get it. And yet some people just can't let go, can they? The workaholic. Again, I saw vanity under the sun. One person who has no other, neither son nor brother. There's no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches. So that he never asks, for whom am I toiling, depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and an unhappy business. Do people stop to ask themselves why? What is it all for? Why bust a gut if you have enough and to spare already? Why keep on accumulating just for the sake of it? You know, that advice here from the New Testament is so wise. Godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing with these, we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, to many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It's through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. And while on the subject, it seems to say, a person with nobody to support, but they still feel they have to push, 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 work, work, work. A little more question, why, seems to shout out. Life is so very much about relationships, isn't it? Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. But if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though a man might prevail against one who is alone, who will withstand? Threefold cord is not quickly broken. And yet the sad thing is that despite all the fancy ways of communicating that have been developed recently, there are still so many people who are still lonely. Even in relationships, people are longing for reality. Maybe that's why some people are forever moving on. Hoping that with the next partner, perhaps, they'll find what they haven't found with their trail of previous partners. And even if it does work out, and the problem is that despite all the love songs in the world, even the strongest love cannot survive indefinitely against that slowly advancing tide of our mortality. All that will be left one day is memory. And memory doesn't last either. The writer finishes his chapter with a little cameo sketch. I'm presuming that it's imaginary, but wouldn't it be even more ironic if he is actually referring to someone, but we don't know who it is? Just proving the very point. So, better was a poor and wise youth, those last few verses there, than an old and foolish king who longer knew how to take advice. You go through that little sketch and right down the bottom there. Yeah, this was a great monarch. He became a great king, and yet, despite there being no end to all the people, all of whom he led, yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. He'll be forgotten in time. Even the greatest will be forgotten. Could be his name will endure, but no one will be there to remember him who knew him. Just think about it. Anyone know who the Prime Minister was 100 years ago? Well, that's all right, because I don't mind it. Come closer to home. Because who cares who was Prime Minister 100 years ago? That's just to pass a history exam. Do you know the names of your great-grandparents? Where were they born? How did they meet? Where are they buried? If you research your family history, you might know those things. But I guess that for most people, the only even semi-permanent record is a headstone in a cemetery somewhere. 70 or 80 years telescoped into just a few engraved lines. And in time, it'll be overgrown and eroded by the wind. As one of the Psalms puts it, as for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field, for the wind passes over it and it is gone, and its place knows it no more. Even on Remembrance Sunday, when I have to say, really, don't I? If all you're hoping for permanence is a lodging place in someone's heart and memories, that's not something that will last either. A few decades perhaps, certainly a few centuries, and you'll just be another anonymous face, like, here's a picture of a group, I don't know how many, how many's a battalion, a group of soldiers. Who knows who those people are now? As far as the rest of the world is concerned, the tracks you left on the sand will just have been wiped out by the successive tides. All that you might identify with today's title. The reality, I think, is more that you want the world to stop and take notice of you. Acknowledge that you are at least marginally significant in some way. That what you do means something, that who you are, all those aspirations, all those desires, all those hopes that you have had down through 70 years and 10, no matter how poorly you actually dedicated to achieving them, or how successful or not you were in achieving them, but all the things that make you you need that to mean something. So is it true what Ecclesiastes says, right back at the introduction of the book? Vanity or vanities, says the preacher. Vanity or vanities, always vanity. Do you get the general message? What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The earth doesn't take notice of the earth's sins. Actually, just look closer, because there is that phrase again, under the sun. It's the key to unlocking the puzzle of this book. Leaving God out of the picture, that's all you've got. Vanity, emptiness. Click your fingers and it's gone. Blink and it's yesterday. If you ignore God. Insist that God stays at arm's length. And you're asking for the kind of existence where stop the world I want to get off is the only thing that makes some kind of sense. But come to the end of the book of Ecclesiastes and you find at least a break in the bleakness. The alternative to life under the sun. Here in chapter 12. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, at which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Stop the world I want to get off. Factor God into your life now, before life becomes so draining, so overwhelming, so tiring as you slow down. Before you become so world-weary that you just want to stop the world and jump off. Build the understanding of how things actually work and why, even despite appearances at times, there is still light at the end of the tunnel. Build that hope into your life now, into your thinking now, let it transform your living. But I'd like to be far more specific than just this, referring to your Creator, mentioning God as if you can define God however you like. That's what people would say nowadays. But no, I want to be far more specific than that. And I want that being more specific to show you how now, even if you think you are too far gone for this bit of advice, you can't be that far gone. Let me take you to a bleak Jewish hilltop 2,000 years ago, 1,000 or so years after those words of Ecclesiastes were written. God, the Creator, that we're told to remember in the days of our youth. God, the Creator, has entered the scene in person. But he had no warm reception, no welcoming committees, as we'll remember in 11 months' time, and no room at the inn. He was in the world. The world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. Well, that's an understatement, isn't it? Did not receive him. That non-reception evolved into full-out rejection. The Creator was led to the ultimate symbol of rejection, a cross. When they came to the place that is called the skull, there they crucified him. But for the soldiers on duty that day, it was just a pretty average day, really. Fairly routine job, crucifixion. 3 guys to dispatch today, actually. Jesus and 2 other lowlives. 2 others who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And those 3 crosses on that Jewish hillside represent every human being who has ever lived or will live. In the centre is the man like no other. He is the human being par excellence. He is the Word made flesh. He is God become man. And when they came to the place that is called the skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And on one side of him are people who reject him, along with this criminal who says, are you not Christ? Save yourself and us. Mocking him, railing at him. And then there are people who say, actually it's not so much that they remember Jesus, but it's the other way round. But the other rebuked him, saying, do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? We indeed justly. For we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man, Jesus, has done nothing wrong. And he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Just a few hours of agony left to his life. No hope whatsoever. Everyone knew that the cross was the end. It is the ultimate stopping of the world. You are about to get off. You are due to make your final departure imminently in the most appalling way conceivable. If you feel it's too late for you to remember your Creator in the days of your youth, well, you feel perhaps you've made too many mistakes, committed too many sins, accumulated too many wounds, dealt out quite enough damage of your own. What hope can you have with all that baggage weighing you down? I'd say just as much hope as the second criminal on that other side of Jesus. I'd suggest your condition cannot be worse than his. And when he asked Jesus to remember him, here was Jesus' answer. And he said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." If that is what Jesus is still willing to offer you today, to someone who has come to the end of themselves, realises that they actually have nothing to offer, well, maybe you're right. Maybe it is time to stop the world, to get off. Because it is time to get on board with that hope and that eternal life that Jesus came to bring. Let's pray now.